Sit down with the muses behind the music. You will be inspired to think higher, realize your gift. Join the muses and Michele, Gina. Turn this up and through your speakers is the music of music.
Hello to everybody. We are the Muses Behind the Music, and I am your host, Michele Fowlin. It is really a great day. It's a good day in the neighborhood. I was about to say something like that was Mr. Rogers, and I wasn't even thinking about Mr. Rogers, y'all. But it is a good day today, and I'm definitely excited about this conversation with my friend, colleague, the Dr. Raynetta Wiggins-Jackson, ethnomusicologist. That's always a mouthful for me to say, let alone to spell it. So for those of you, we're going to really get into this meaty, beautiful conversation about what I grew up with, what she grew up with, coming up into the church. Different experiences for the two of us, as you've heard me share many times coming up in the church. Although now my offerings are into the African American church. That's not where I was really raised, although I experienced it for a short time period in New York and really loved gospel music. So now it really just encompasses my life. It is a part of my spiritual practice. It is a music that I listen to for encouragement, for enrichment, for just joy. And it's such a beautiful history. It's also a history of challenges, of struggle, of perseverance. And I know that I am determined to make sure that this beautiful, rich, African American form of music stays alive in the ears, in the faces, and in the hearts of people, more so than just in the church. I mean, Lord knows we need to make sure that we can keep it alive in the church as well, because I'm having some very interesting feelings about where gospel music is heading these days. And so I'm hoping that my dear friend and colleague can help break down some things in conversation tonight. Excuse me. Please feel free to go on ahead, drop comments, questions. I want them. She wants them. We want them. What are you thinking? What would you like to know? I'll tell you a little bit about sister friend Raynetta here. She hails out of Birmingham, Alabama. There's some great things coming out of the South. And if you really get her going, you're going to hear that accent. I don't have one. I just tried to give you one, but it's really not there. But you're going to hear it come alive. So she came from the South, and here she comes. Hey, Sister Ro. It's good to see you. See you. And she received her bachelor's from Berea College and her master's and her PhD in ethnomusicology from Indiana University. I never shared with her before, but Indiana was one of the spaces that my father was attempting to have me go to, but I chose otherwise. Her work has focused on the research, performance, and the preservation of African American music with an emphasis on sacred music in film and media. We're going to talk to her a little bit about that this evening. She has served as a recurring faculty member from her alma mater with the Berea College African American Traditional Music Symposium and Workshop. Good God, that is a mouthful. And I mean, don't we have some acronyms? Hopefully she'll give us some of that a little bit later. And she now is the Washington Performing Arts manager of choir curriculum and performance. So she works with me, with Children of the Gospel. She works with Theodore Thorpe, with Men and Women of the Gospel, and just all of the wonderful artists that come through that work with us as well. She's also an active member of the Ben Holt Memorial Branch of the National Association of Negro Musicians, and she gave this amazing virtual conversation during their convention. And the title of it was Listening Beyond the Notes: How Exploring Our Collective Musical Journeys Creates Pathways to Tomorrow. If there's one thing that I can share with you about her, is that she will rock a title for you. I mean, and it has to be all of the study and the reading that she has done. But these themes that just come, to me, I do call it a talent and a gift. It just births from her, and they just fit so well. I say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and she's able to put these words together. Anyway, without further ado, my dear fellow Muses, I would like to welcome my friend again and colleague, ethnomusicologist, Dr. Raynetta Wiggins-Jackson. Hey, sis.
Hello.
How you feel? I'm good.
Okay. I
How
am
you?
Tuesdaying.
Listen, every day of the week could have an ing, a process to it. And so I fully understand exactly what you mean when you say just Tuesday. Every day feels like a Monday sometimes for me. So I really,
Yes.
really get it. I get it. Ray, I'm so glad that you are on tonight. You know, a lot of people do not even know what an ethnomusicologist is. So I'd like to just start there. If you could just give us, you know, a definition of what you do, who you are, what that is.
So I think the simplest definition for ethnomusicology is the study of music in context. Some people will say the study of music and culture. That's a little bit older definition, but more recently, it's the study of music in social context and cultural context. And so that means that you can really study almost anything. And even the field itself has expanded. And so I know people who are studying what they call soundscapes. I know that's a popular term right now, of what it means for the sounds that have kind of identified a space to change and that kind of thing. So I studied gospel music, but I know people who have studied music and musical cultures and communities truly all over the world. There are some things that unite a lot of people, but it's still not true for everyone. So a lot of what ethnomusicologists do is ethnography. So they're going into a community, they're asking questions, they're learning the music perhaps, they're learning about how people teach the music and talk about the music, depending on what their research is. Some of it may involve archival work. My work involved films, and other people have involved films. Some people created documentaries based on their work. So there's a lot of different approaches, and I think that's the nice part of ethnomusicology, that you can find a space for yourself and that will accommodate what you're looking for if you're willing to work. And I think that's the thing, because you are looking at the broader context, and that means that your focus both has to be small enough to be attainable, but large enough to know what's happening around it in order for it to be meaningful.
So when you say the work, are you referring to the research?
Yeah, the research, and because the research is one part of it, and then there's the writing, or documentary making, or conference. I did a conference for my master, so there's a lot of ways that the research can come up. So, but before you even get to whatever that thing that you're creating, whatever you're sharing to the world, before you get to that place, there is the research, and that is the talking to people and the reading, and the reading some more, and then something else is going to come out that somebody wrote, and it's going to be great, and you got to read that, or that's the film, that's the heavy analysis of film. That is, it's all of those people that I think take more time than even I was ready for in some ways. I especially enjoyed the dissertation. But I think I had to settle into, this is going to take longer than I anticipated, and I had an advisor who was amazing in saying, oh yeah, that'll take a couple years. And I was like, years? I'm looking for 6 months work, and she just helped me land that plane and say, no, I need you to adjust your expectations about, and that's specifically for the PhD. Like if you're doing the master's, theoretically, it wouldn't take that kind of work, and not every project is going to take that amount of time. But, you know, the idea is if you are going to be invested in what it is that you're talking about, especially if you're working with living communities.
Yeah.
With film, it's a little bit different because those things have already been created to an extent. But if you're working with living, growing communities, that's going to take time for you to get invested into who they are, even if you consider yourself a member of that community.
Wow. So literally, you know, so your dissertation, the research that you have done, you could go back to this thing a year from now, 2 years from now, and you can expand on it. It could grow all the more. That sounds like a book to me.
Is that a hint? That's not even a small hint. That's a large.
I'm just saying, you know, it sounds like the possibilities. You ever think about, I mean, after you spend time, first of all, you already said, you know, I loved the dissertation. I have not heard one single person who has done their doctorate who has used that verbiage before. So kudos to you for that. But the reality is, I mean, you've done a lot of research, a lot of writing. Why not consider, you know, putting it into a book? Sure. Let us as students come and, you know, read what you wrote.
Right. So I want to clarify and say the process. There was a love, hate, something else in between with the process, because it is vulnerable, like any creative act, right? It is vulnerable, and depending on where you are in life, you're poor, and you know, there's so many factors there. But I appreciate the fact that I still like the topic. Like there are some things you do, and when you're done, you're done. And I don't necessarily feel like that with my topic. I am considering at this point now, maybe I would, you know, transition it into a book. When I got done with it at first, no. There are no words left to write at that point. But now I'm very interested in that process. But also, it's an interesting time because several of the films that I mentioned and that I write about extensively are being revisited, right? And so Sister Act franchise is being revisited. The Preacher's Wife, I just saw a little, you know, gossip. It wasn't even really a gossip blog. It was legit, but it was a little something that says, "Oh, we're going to reimagine The Preacher's Wife." I'm nervous about what that means. I'll just be honest. Not that you shouldn't invite me to come, people. But there's also Imitation of Life, right? Which is not based on gospel music, but it's Michele Jackson on film. So what more do we need to say? So for me, it's just like, are we going to resurrect Michele? What do we do? You know, how are we handling this? But of course, that scene may not even come into play, depending on how they reimagine it. So so at a space where we're deciding to revisit these stories, what does that mean that we're further into the 21st century, right? Because when I stopped, my dissertation in some ways stops at the early 2000s, right? Because after, other than Joyful Noise, which features Queen Latifah and Dolly Parton, after that film, you don't get a lot of major films that are like specifically focusing on gospel music until now, maybe, right? Depending on where they take Sister Act and these other films. And so then there's an interesting question around why now? Is it a part of the larger, some would say a groundswell around Black media, and that, you know, that's a hot thing now to do with Blacks are back? No. Or is that something else? Don't quote me.
I am.
Is that something else? But these things are cyclical. That there is a certain degree to which engagement with Black media and a proliferation of Black media products and projects, I think, is a little bit cyclical. In the 70s, you see it with Blaxploitation, and part of the emphasis there was, or the impetus was, they were going broke. So how do we, you know, make some money real quick on some low budget? So here comes, you know, Blaxploitation that blows up, and that happens. And then in the 90s, you have something similar happen, and especially with a lot of kind of music-based films that show up. Some of the films I talk about aren't a part of that. Sister Act wouldn't really fit into that world, but you know, there is a cycle to these things, and I'm curious to see if this interest in revisiting some of these films are a part of a similar cycle.
I would like to see, and I'd like to hear of the films that incorporate gospel music that do not have a church base, i.e., Sister Act, or The Life of Mahalia. I want to be able to, I want them to be able to choose gospel music, infuse it in a lot of these films as if they're listening to, R&B, classical, hip hop, just, they're just an array of different things. And it's not that films haven't done it, but how do you, the ethnomusicologist, what is the movement into getting that to happen? For getting gospel music to show up more in those arenas?
So I guess I want to make sure I understand your question. So you're saying you want to hear gospel music even in films that aren't gospel related,
period,
but outside of a church context.
Yes. Yeah. Like, I don't want to just,
You want it in the soundtrack. You want a gospel song in the background while somebody is doing something totally unrelated. They cooking and there's a gospel song going on, that kind of thing, right?
It's a play. It's a play. Like, people are going to hear it. I'm moved by that. As a musician, I'm paying attention to the music when I'm watching a movie. And if it moves me and it fits well with what's happening, in schematically in the scene, I'm there. I'm researching, well, who is this? What did I hear? I'm waiting till the end of the movie for the credits. I just don't get that enough unless I'm watching a film that is specifically about the church. It has been, a T.D. Jakes film, Tyler Perry film. I want to hear it more. How do we get that?
I think it depends on a number of things, and one of them being who's programming what music is showing up, whether that's the composer or the music supervisor, or whoever's in that role, and what the extent of their imagination, right? There are spaces in which that happens. I'm thinking of August Rush, but it's still a church scene, but the movie's not about church at all. If you remember Hustle and Flow, there's a moment.
Yes.
There's a
Absolutely.
church scene with a moment, and then we've been lifted, and now we go somewhere else. And so I think some of it is about our individual, maybe our collective imagination of what gospel music means. And so in order, if for you gospel is the church, like if there's no way to extract the music, and it now more than ever, it's so diverse, the sounds are so diverse, I think you could easily make that case. But if you don't have somebody who's in a position of power, who's making those decisions about the music, to think about different ways of employing, I would dare say, all Black musics into film, then I don't think it's going to necessarily change. The other side of that is, what is the risk in making that change? Because if you are creating a certain kind of film and you're working within a particular genre or parameter, and you decide to conform to the conventions of that genre, then you're imagining people are expecting to hear a certain thing. Oh, this is a song, or this is about young Black people in the urban center of Chicago, whatever. And so, well, what is the soundtrack of Young Chicago? And so, that's kind of what it feels like, for some people's approaches.
Right.
And I think to infuse religious music into those spaces, because I'm not saying religious music isn't in those spaces, but is there a risk associated with that if you believe that whatever music you choose has the potential to alienate part of the audience that you want to watch? So I think there's probably some risk assessment involved, as well as imagination, that has to be.
I so want to continue this aspect right here, and this is not the way that I was planning on going right now, but let's stick here for a second. I find, for me as a gospel musician, one who has, embraced the music for many, many years, that the change of gospel irritates me. The change in the sound is bothersome, let alone the lyrics. I have found that when we started in the late 80s, early 90s to what's the right word that I'm looking for? Make some changes so that we could I guess be a little bit more hip, be a little bit more current, to bring other people in, because I used to hear gospel artists speaking about this all the time and saying, we're just trying to save people in ways that, they're not going to listen to church music like the regular way. But now we've totally lost it to me. Like, totally, how far is too far? I don't get to hear, like, we're removing choirs out of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody now is going into this praise and worship format, which was not us. It is how we are taking on the looks of other cultures and how they worship. And it's just, come on and help me. Help me. You hear me struggling over here. I'm trying to make sense of
right.
this.
So I think there are a couple things at play, right? So one of them is your irritation with gospel music currently is not unique to you, in that this is a conversation that happens probably every generation. So
well, thank
from
you,
the
Lord.
beginning, and I say that, when it comes to church music, but specifically Black church music. I mean, from the top, you have the biggest artists, Dorsey, Mahalia, all of them saying how they was basically shunned, and then they weren't shunned because everybody was like, well, this music's good. There's reasons behind that. And then you have the next generation coming along, and you have the Hawkins and that generation coming along doing what they did, and they really got shunned. And then everybody was like, but nope, this music's good and we're singing it. So there's that cycle that happens. I think the and the communication around that has been quite similar, which is I'm using this medium to reach people where they are, right? Almost every time this is the sound of now. And as long as I'm sharing the good news, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I was called to do. The interesting thing of now is I do agree that there has been an interesting shift regarding, and I guess I'm thinking that you're talking about specifically praise and worship, CCM style praise and worship music that you see arise in the late 70s into the 80s and really grow. And there were Black people who were considered a part of that to an extent, like a Ron Canoli, someone like that. There were Black people who were a part, but that was a movement that felt largely driven by CCM. And the major Black musics did not exactly sound like that. But as we've gotten into the 20th century, I think a lot of things have changed around not just churches, but how we organize churches and how we organize music in the context of church. The interesting thing there is both camps, and when I say both, I know I'm making a dichotomy, but those who are like true gospel versus I love worship music, both camps feel like their music better addresses the larger community of the church. Some of this is related to what they feel like are more relatable lyrics. Some of it is related to just the sonic properties. What are you expecting to feel when you hear religious music? And I think as we have built, as we have built intellectual ideas around the current church and what music is meant to do in the current church, I think the conversation becomes just ever more complicated. And I don't know if there is an actual resolution to it, right? I know, I feel like I grew up at the perfect time because, and I say that because I got to experience like old church, hardwood floor church. I mean, we had instruments and electricity, and, running water, but it was still like old hardwood church. And then I was, here as a part of the praise and worship experience, and as it has grown beyond that. But I think there is there is an idea or an ideal sometimes that I hear communicated around worship music, right? And that is to say, for some, worship music they feel like is better speaking to their relationship with God, or it's getting at something that gospel music is not. Gospel music, depending on who it is too old timey, or it's too repetitive. It doesn't feel contemporary. And I think for some of them, they're looking for something that feels contemporary. The hard part is the worship experience itself, I think. And what I mean by that is a lot of what I hear in gospel music, not all of what I hear in common play of gospel music, I don't even want people to try to replicate in church service. I don't want you to even give it a go, because that is not going to in normal
depending. Yeah, I'm with you.
Depending on who it is. It's not everyone, but I'm saying some of those songs I don't think they're built to serve that purpose. And so in the absence of that, worship songs with their 4 chords are very replicable in the church service. I mean, but
that's really where we are. That's where we are. So in this moment, what do you think the purpose, the role of music is in the Black church currently? Because we used to go to church and the music, I always say this today too, it's 2 things people are going to church for: the word and the music. They gonna skip the benediction. They ain't gonna show up necessarily all the time for praise and worship. And I think that they'll show up for the choir, but that is ingrained in us, because it's almost like the choir really does have the message. It's really about to carry the message that they're looking for. We were in tune, to me, again, these are all of my very strong factual opinions. Strong. Like, we were very in tune with what we were having to deal with out in the world, and the church was the refuge for us. And inside of that, with music, we were finding levels of hope, of encouragement. You gonna make it. I know sometimes, I know some way we're gonna make it. You understand? Like, woo, yes, I am. I feel that. We're not getting that anymore. We're not there anymore. So what do you think the role really is? Do you think that we're trying to assimilate? I'm specifically referring to the Black church, because all other churches, well, I can't speak to anymore because I don't attend like that, but specifically in the Black church.
Right. So I'm going to give the same preface. This is just my strong thought, mine, and I'm not representing a whole community. There is a degree to which I have asked myself that question, specifically around. I saw a post, and I may have said this somewhere else. I saw a post from a woman that I follow who's a theologian, and she talked about how she was disappointed in the ways in which the Black church specifically has kind of abandoned, this is my word, not hers necessarily, abandoned Black music in the church. And she positioned it as specifically Black church leaders, whether they're music or maybe clergy, trying to gain access to either positions, people, money through changing the way in which church operated, right? And that included the music. And so the hard part of that, like, I haven't done deep research into that to say, one way or the other, if that's totally the truth. But I do know a lot of what was considered modern in my coming up was this movement to, we need to have a praise team. Like, what is this choir thing that we're doing? In some instances, depending on what your church structure was, the praise team was perhaps a little bit more manageable, right? Like, if you have a large church, a few thousand people, getting 10 people together to practice versus managing 80 or more is a different thing. I do know mega churches who do that, though, who have a strong 100 people up there and they go manage them and they go sing,
Absolutely.
And so I do question assimilation, but assimilation, not just arbitrarily, right?
Mhm.
I think it is connected to what I've heard some like gospel hip hop rappers and other people, when they started talking about how when they learned other theology, they felt like what they had been fed before, and fed, that's a very church term, in it.
Mhm.
What they had been fed before was in some ways lacking, and that they walked into some meatier theology. And that's the same energy sometimes I feel around certain praise and worship forms or certain praise and worship musical experiences. There's this idea of this is heavier, this is deeper, this is more meaningful. And this is not to question somebody's personal conviction or experience, but to say, I think we have to grapple with, are we unjustly or unfairly penalizing or not really looking deeply enough into what has historically been the Black church and what it is now. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. And so my next question is, haven't we always been at this like war with who worships better? I mean, that's how movements within the church was started. The Black church, you know, when, you know, Blacks weren't allowed to worship. So they had to go and hide themselves. And then it became how they worshiped. Then the holiness movement came in, and, you know, inside the Black church, it was, you know, if you weren't falling out or you weren't speaking in tongues, then you didn't know God. You didn't have a relationship. We're always going through this battle with trying to prove our level of holiness, our level of spiritual connection to God. And I agree with you strongly when I think about that. I think about, you know, us bringing in praise and worship teams, and it's like, okay, yes, this is going to bring us closer to God. I grew up with praise and worship teams, you know, because that's what in the white churches that I came up in, that's all they did. Choirs, it was the flip. It was choirs had 5 people.
Oh,
that's the real. And everybody wanted to be on the praise and worship team. There was something just cool about they stood in front, and you know, and it was, you know, Hillsongy, and it was, you know, it was all of those wonderful things. And don't get me wrong, I love that. I love that. I mean, it's all over my playlist. But I don't want us to get into the space where I feel like it is this competition that we don't even consciously recognize we're doing, you know, that I want us to be intentional about the purpose of, well, why do you have a praise team? Because I guarantee you a lot of ministers, pastors, they can't answer that question, yet they want it ever so desperately, because I've been in those spaces where they want to eliminate the choir because now we got to keep up with the world. Well, why? You know, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And you being...
I just want to make this one quick point, which is I think there's a degree to which, too, the praise team is not removed from, and I was say specifically in the Black church, is not removed from like devotion back in the day. Like, depending on your denomination, you know, it might have been a deacon. In my denomination, it was a couple women up there leading some call and response song, you know, depending on your denomination. I don't think it's removed from that, especially in churches that have the multiple ensembles and that kind of stuff. But for churches for whom the praise and worship team is like the star and everybody else is the, you know, the background cast, I think it is worth interrogation of the, not like exactly what you're saying, the why. I think there is precedent. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. I think there's precedent for there to be a smaller group of people who are leading worship at a certain part of the service. That's not removed from the Black church experience. But if we go to radio airplay, I did this a while ago, to see how many choirs are charting versus how many solo acts or small groups and ensembles. And over time, especially as you get into the 90s and out of the 90s into the 2000s, choirs chart so much less with new music than anybody else, if they chart at all in a year. And you know, and someone else is charting the most right now, who we don't have to go there, but
I'm with you. Oh, I know. So I mean, here it is. You were raised in the church. You're a PK. Oh my. You know what they say. No, because you know what they say, like, you know, PKs always have, there's a little bit of calling that they run from, you know.
Yeah, they say things like that.
I'm just saying, I mean, I've listened to you in conversation before, and I have shared with you that there's a little something in there. I'm like, okay, come on, preacher. I definitely hear that. But, you know, going into this field of ethnomusicology, you could have chosen just a plethora of different spaces to focus on. Was church, gospel music, you know, the calling for you with this, because there was just this love and passion that was built all your life for it. How did you come to gospel?
Sure. So growing up, gospel was the only music. I grew up real Pentecostal. So, you know, other than commercials, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity. There was some classical, piano lessons and stuff like that. But generally, the gospel was the genre. And so it was so interesting to me, even really young, I would be interested in like John P. Key. And I'm like, you know, these artists that I love. And I'm talking to kids on the playground and they're like, who? You know? I was like, how do you not know who John P. Key? I was so offended. How do you not know who John P. Key is? Who are you? You know, that kind of thing. And so when I get into undergrad, for me, gospel music, I looked at it a little bit. I was learning more about gospel there. And so then I learned about different contours of it and how it's connected to a larger history for African Americans. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like, oh, this is a bigger story than, you know, than I initially realized, because you're not getting that lesson in at least not my high school, great high school, but that lesson we weren't having at that moment. And so the further I went, the more I learned about African American history, the more interested I became in how gospel music fit into that larger story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of what my entry point for gospel music was, is that it just always was the music that I listened to the most. And so I had the most knowledge and experience. I shared it with that was the music I shared the most with others. And so even now, though, I still feel like there's so much I don't know. And I'm always looking to learn about artists that existed a long time ago, new art, you know, always looking for ways to engage with it meaningfully.
Do you think that we are doing enough to continue engaging the community and gospel music? What are we missing, especially as artists? You know, I always ask the question to artists, do you feel that you have a responsibility to be more present in the community? I almost feel like, you know, sometimes it's removed. Gospel music has been removing itself from that level of responsibility. What do you think?
I think that's always been the case, right? I think there have always been those who have spoken, and there have always been those who say that's not my place. I'm talking about Christ, and he's a great unifier, right? Like, I think there's people who lived on both sides of that. I think everybody, and this is artists and beyond, has a responsibility to find their thing, right? I don't know that we are all responsible for speaking on everything. Unless you are going to be the most educated person, you know, not that we aren't all empathetic, and not that we don't all stand up for injustice when we encounter it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if we are talking about like intensive service, I think all artists have a responsibility to find their space within that. What is your intensive service thing? Because I don't think every artist, for me personally, I wouldn't want every artist speaking for me. Like, if it's an issue directly related to me, there are some things I don't want Kanye to address. Like, you know, I don't want every artist speaking for me, because not every artist is equipped. Now they can become equipped, and I think we should all be equipped for something, some work. But if you are going to be someone who says, I'm speaking to and for the people and with the people, then I think you do have to be concerned about what's happening with the people.
It was that last sentence for me. You got to be concerned about what's happening with the people, because I'm not exactly sure, and correct me if I'm wrong. Name some gospel artists, and you know, Muses listening in. Name some gospel artists in the last 5 to 10 years that we have had some major social injustices happening. Again, repeated. Press play on that. But they have been intentional in how they are going to influence the ears of the listeners, their audience members, the people who buy their albums, who stream their music, who go to their concerts, and who need to hear a word from them. I can't name any, and so maybe I'm off. Somebody, please name somebody.
So I will say that I'm thinking of two right now. I can only speak to a little bit of one about how much it's permeated his music, which is Kirk Franklin. I will clarify to say I don't follow a lot of artists. I follow some, but I don't follow everybody. So I can't speak to the gambit of everyone. One is Kirk Franklin. And the thing that was most interesting to me, he stood up about was the Devil Wars. And I don't know if you saw this. The Devil War, I think twice at the Devil Wars, he made a statement about, it may have been about police violence or some violence against Black people, something like that. And TBN edited the Devil Wars and edited out that part of his speech.
Wow,
and so he said he was boycotting. And he put that on
I do remember that.
the social medias, and it became a thing, and they met. And I don't really remember how it resolved. But he I think he, maybe more than a lot of the people I see, is explicit about at least acknowledging what's happening.
Yeah, he's explicit in his music too. I don't mean to cut you off, and I love and appreciate that about him. Boom. Yes, Kirk.
Right. I would say Lecrae is another. He's not, I guess, mainstream gospel, but he is a Christian rapper, if you will. He tries to be very aware. He's had some slip ups lately, but he apologized. He admitted it, but
that's all right.
You know, he works to be very aware. It shows up in his music. He had a kind of life pivot around social issues and finding himself, knowing he was Black, knowing about Black history, and struggling with his predominantly or a largely white audience who had different expectations of him. So he's someone else who's spoken about that. Ted Nguyen, I follow him online, and he speaks frequently. He's always posting of Ted and Sherry, for those who look at.
Yeah. Okay.
Who's frequently posting about injustices and issues and that kind of thing. So those are the ones that are top of mind for me. But like I said, I don't follow everyone, and I'm willing to bet that there are those out there doing the work who may not be publicizing it. So I don't know if they're giving money to charities. I don't know, you know, that I think that could show up a lot of different ways. And perhaps what I'm hearing from you is you want it to be public. If you're going to be supporting a thing, people need to hear what's happening in your world because they're listening to you already.
Yeah, I mean, be private too. I mean, do what you need to do. But I think that we have some major influencers of gospel music who, when it comes to these big ticket items that are happening in our world, I just want to hear them more. I want to hear and see them more. Knowing that the church has been the cornerstone, I'm going to use that word because I know Jesus is the cornerstone, y'all, okay? But knowing that the church has been this into the Black community, it also makes me, you know, delve and ask the ministers who are out there as well, what are you all doing? You know, because it just doesn't fall on top of the gospel artists, but we all play some level, as you were saying, some part. No, we're not all called to do it on a big platform, but I think that we just need to have more and more positive influences and conversations that go out into the ears, because young people are listening and they get enough foolishness from the world. You know, and I think that this is just a great space that when God has given you that kind of influence, that we ought to be able to use that a little bit more wisely. That's just, again, it's Michele Fowlin's very strong factual opinions.
Do you think there is
Right.
a fear, or I know we're coming to, do you think there is perhaps a little bit of fear or unwillingness to be studied about that which you would speak? Because you have to have a little bit of, well, it would be wise to have some knowledge of what you're speaking on, but that requires you to stretch into that. Are people, and that's just not just artists, are people willing to stretch into those uncomfortable spaces so they're equipped to have those conversations?
I often wonder, because just in general, I think our community struggles with the with process, and part of what you're talking about is a process. You got to research, you got to read, you've got to dig into it, you've got to talk to people. And we are, a lot of us just want quick fix and quick notions to things. So, I think that's a big part of our struggle into getting into the meat of that part of the conversation of, really knowing and really understanding, because you got to research. You're right. You got to have some level of intelligence. You just can't come off the cuff of your head. You know what I'm saying? Or just straight on up out of your heart. We want a leader who is knowledgeable too, or people to speak who are knowledgeable as well. I had it in mind to delve into gospel music and some main areas, and I think that we've hit some of them. There is one particular thing that I was reading about Tye Tribbett. Now, if you listen to Tye Tribbett's song, there's a couple of them where Tye Tribbett speaks out against homosexuality. All right, this is a big thorn in the Black church. I don't know about the white churches, but I know homosexuality, sexuality in general, it is for the Black church. Do you see that we have grown a bit more over the course of the last, I don't know, let's say 20 years, that we have been more accepting of Jesus loves everybody, not just in us saying it, but actually knowing it. And especially when it comes to people who are LGBTQIA+, gay marriage, just coming out, just the freedom of doing that. Do you think the church has become a bit more welcoming or just tolerable?
Corporately, I would say, I said probably not much. Corporately, I think it still feels like a fairly hostile place. Some are tolerable. There is tolerance, but tolerance and acceptance are not the same thing that we know. And even tolerance can be dangerous, I think, in some ways. And so I know I've seen a few artists. I've seen a select number of Black preachers who've come out and said, we messed this up. We need to fix how we have treated people from the LGBTQI community plus.
Yes.
And so there have been individuals who have said that and who've recognized a great wrong.
Yeah.
But I think overall, I have not seen one denomination that was Black, unless I don't know of it. And I'm not talking about those who are already accepting or who were founding to be accepted, because there are those denominations who were founded to be accepting. But I haven't seen one of those mainline denominations come out and say, we jacked this up, let's fix it.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking about those which are more so led by predominantly white congregations. And so I'm talking about, like the Episcopalians or something like that. Unless you're moving it to a different denominational space, when we talk about the Black churches. And I could be wrong. This is not an area I research, but I don't, it still doesn't feel like the most, I wouldn't think it was the most comfortable space. And I think injury is still being done on a large scale to people.
Yeah. And I mentioned Tye, not because I was picking on him, but I was about to say that I had watched, I had read a article clip that he had made this quote And I paraphrase it by saying he said, I'm not condemning homosexuality anymore, but I just don't believe that it's God's best for a lifestyle for us. And so I mentioned his songs because, I know, right? That's the face that I had too. So if you listen to some of Tye's songs, like he just is straight up like, come out of homosexuality, like breaking it down. But years after, this was like 2016 that he had said this. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a little bit interesting to me. And maybe that's the softening of who and what we are in the church and how we've been taught and how we've been cultured to believe how God thinks and feels.
Yeah, no, I think some of it is definitely cultural, right? I think so much of the work of some Black theologians right now is unpacking the ways in which white theology has shaped what we believe, right?
Yes.
And I would dare say that's almost everything. Like we're unpacking almost all of it in a lot of ways, And so I think that is a part of the lineage, right? That is a part of, some people say it's the U.S. and our puritanical roots and all those ideas around how we have developed images of sexuality, period. I'm curious. I have not seen that quote by Tye Tribbett, but I'm curious about how much his life issues and his issues with infidelity regarding his wife impacted his shift in his perspective. Because I feel like I've seen it before. It's like, oh, now that I messed up, well, now everybody gets grace, which is we all supposed to get grace. Anyway, I'm not saying that's wrong. I think he sounds like he's still figuring it out. He sounds like he's still grappling with it. To say that is to say, I know I was wrong for what I was saying, but I still don't think this is right. So I don't have an answer. That's what it feels like. He just doesn't have an answer, which I think I may have respected a little bit more if he had just said, I'm still figuring it out. Now I know for individuals, for some people that would mean that he is still on the wrong side. If you got to figure it out, you're still on the wrong side, right? But looking at process, he has come a ways from where he was.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Monique. Monique said it's the victory song because I couldn't remember what song it was, but yes, it's the victory song that we had done. And I had purposely, intentionally left all of that part out of it because I thought, oh Lord have mercy, and it goes along too with the church in general. The sin that you can see is often the ones that we like to always attack.
Yes,
but the stuff that's behind the scene, because the church ain't talking about the adultery like they need to be.
Well, and even that's sometimes a sin you can see. A lot of times that's a sin you can see. Right? Like how many pastors do we know? We know that drummer sleeping with the pianist's wife. We know, oftentimes we know, and it's just the sin we accept, right? We build it into our culture as normative, despite the fact there is still pain and injury being done, right? So it's the sin we choose to accept versus the sin that we choose to banish or the sin we can, and a lot of times we make those sins up, over time, wearing pants as a woman was a sin. I mean, a true bona fide sin, right? Like, we're making it up. I'm now better than you because I will own more skirts. Like, it's that need to elevate our singular selves or our collective selves above other people that drives this need to pinpoint everybody's sins.
So deep,
right?
That's so deep. No, that's really deep. Yeah. And we learned it from somewhere. We got it from somewhere. We need to break those chains though. Those chains are what's really holding us back from being greater, from really living in the fullness of what I believe the Creator has for each and every one of us. With that, before we end, I'd like for you to share with us two things. One, because I know that there are young people who are listening, and we're always encouraging the younger generation about, you know, those who love and have a passion for music. And you don't share this a lot, but you are a musician yourself. You play and you sing. You know, we had a great duet in a bathroom, and no, seriously, y'all, it was so beautiful. Like, we were just vibing back and forth in a bathroom, random thing. And then in the middle, right toward the end, I should say, of our song, a woman flushed the toilet on us. I thought to myself, my God, she done ruined that. Okay. And we were going for it. But I need for people to know just how, you know, what are the ways that an ethnomusicologist can get out here. It's a viable living. It's a career. This is like, you know, there's so many branches. How do you encourage the young people? What would you share with them if they're interested, or how would they know to be interested? You know, are they like geeked out on reading? Do they like to do all the writing? You know what I mean? Like, what would help them get into that space of knowing?
Sure. I think my most optimistic self says that anybody can be an ethnomusicologist, because I know individuals who are musically inclined and those who are not, who are both ethnomusicologists. So part of it is, where does your interest lie? Part of it is, do you love music? You know, and it's always hard for me to meet someone who doesn't love music. To me, that's a frightening and complicated existence. So I think it's about your love for music. I think you will need to enjoy reading to some level. Most people that I know who are ethnomusicologists love books.
Yeah.
Because there is so much in them. And if you don't love reading, young people, please find a way to love it.
Yeah.
And not just for ethnomusicology, for anything. I think it is a love of questions. I probably have always been someone who asked a lot of questions, but why? But how? How do we get there? Well, you know, and an interest in process.
Yeah.
And I think those things are enough to propel the interest. I mean, and you can get depending on the school, you can get a bachelor's in it, you can get a minor in it, you can, you know, get your master's and up to the PhD. So just from the entry point, you can enter from almost anywhere. And no matter what your musical interest is or your sound interest is, there's probably space for you. And you can kind of make your space too. Like, I made up a minor for myself because of what I wanted to study, you know,
Right.
And they had an infrastructure in place to allow me to do that. With advisement, of course. So I think one of the things too is to imagine that there is space for you, because there is. Perhaps the biggest barrier is believing that there's no space for you because of whatever your identity is. And I
like
say, don't
that.
do that.
Knowing that there is space for you. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, that's quotable.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the second part of your question, wasn't there? I feel like I forgot the second part of the question.
Just knowing that it's viable and how they get interested.
Oh, and what kind of jobs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as like, if you're looking to learn more about it, a lot of schools have some kind of ethno program or some kind of ethno class. Some of those introductory classes are going to just be teaching you about the basics of the history of the field and that kind of thing. Don't be discouraged if that particular thing is not your thing, because that's just trying to give you foundation to get to what the thing that you're interested in. And so there's, I know there was a program at UMD, but there's programs all around, and there's teachers. You probably can Google the Society for Ethnomusicology as well, and find a bunch of resources about ethno there. As far as careers, ethnomusicologists do all kinds of things. So I'm in arts management. There are quite a few in arts management. Some teach at the collegiate level. Some work in the music industry. Some make records. Some are performing artists who gig and travel regularly with other jobs. There are those who work as folklorists. Some work in museums. I know quite a few of them who curate in major music museums throughout the country, the Blues Museum, the Jazz Museum in Dayton. So there's all kind of opportunities there, smaller museums. So there's a lot of different places. And the nice part about ethnomusicology is that it's not just about the music typically. If you're studying the context, oftentimes you're also familiar with other things surrounding it, and you learn about how to study process, which will benefit you no matter what field you find yourself in. So you're not just tethered to having to go and be a professor.
I love it. Yeah, right. Not everybody wants to just go into teaching. That's very true. 10 years from now, Ray, Where are you?
Independently wealthy.
Yes.
10 years from now. I'm not sure. 10 years from now, I imagine if I am going to write a book, it's going to be written back within the next 10 years.
Right.
If I'm going to transition that into a book. 10 years from now, I don't have an exact image of the quote unquote work that I'm doing. But I do think that there will be some part of my life that is autonomously creative.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so whether that looks like graphic work, graphic design work, whether that looks like music making, I'm not sure. But I know the next 10 years will likely be a build into that. And hopefully more conversations like this, right? So, I have these conversations all the time with my friends, but they're often not public conversations. Yeah. So I would love to engage more, study more, read more.
You hear that, y'all?
Conversations like this.
I need all of you who are listening in. I'm telling you, I shared with you the other day, Ray, when we talk, it reminds me of my Howard days. Being able to like kick back, because we used to do this all the time and just be up until 3, 4, 5 in the morning, just, bouncing thoughts and ideas off of one another and how we feel. And I love that you are by far one of the most intellectual sisters I know out here, and just nuts intelligent, man. It just blows my mind. I love how you think. I love how you're always processing. I love that's her favorite words to me. Like if it's not the answer right away, she's like, I'm processing. And I'm taking that right now too. So I'm processing too. There was a phenomenal question that came in, and I really just want you to hit on this question right now, and then we're going to depart. But the question was, do you see a major future collaboration between ethnomusicologists and music therapists?
Absolutely. Part of the conversation, I'm going back in the archives of my mind at this point.
Yeah.
Because I took a class on music and healing that was led by ethnomusicologists, and specifically looking at all of the ways cultures look at and talk about healing. And one of those units was music therapy. And so I think, as music therapists surely know, and practice, right? The more cultural competency I think we have around the individuals that we're trying to help, the stronger everybody's work is. And so, of course, we see the videos of individuals taking old music, music from a person's generation to them and letting them hear it, and how that revitalizes that individual for some time. So I think that space is definitely open. I'm thinking about a few like programs. I know there's a couple in Florida where there are people studying kind of the therapeutic benefits of music. And so I definitely think that is a window that is open, and that probably could use a little more push, as we move forward, a little more nudging. But I definitely think that conversation is there, because healing and ritual is such a big part of our musical existence.
Period.
So I think it's only natural for those two industries to work even more intentionally together.
Well, I'm going to be very intentional and make sure that I hook you up with this sister who is not only a COTG alum, but she is also one of your sorors, and she is a music therapist. And here you are, an ethnomusicologist. And so we're just going to make those two things happen. And I think this needs to be a wonderful panel. That's what that sounds like. It needs to be a future Muses Behind the Music conversation between the two of you all.
Cool.
Dr. Ray, I appreciate you, sis. I really do. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your preparation. Thank you for what you have poured into us this evening. There's so many great things that I'm going to go back and I'm going to digest myself and relive and just, meditate on it. I'm going to ruminate. That's my favorite word. Okay. Upon it, and hopefully eventually begin to share it with others as well, impacting them. To all of the Muses, Thank you so much for being a part of the show this evening. And there were so many comments that were coming in. Thank you so much for your great support of Dr. Mrs., of the Muses Behind the Music. And I am definitely looking forward to our next conversation in the next couple of weeks. So to you all, until then, blessed be.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ray.